close your laptop? I can close it.
Yeah, but I'll open it when I get there.
Okay. Sit here. Sit here.
People up in the cheap seat area,
Okay, the door has to be closed from now.
the balcony.
When people come in, you just close it again. Zainab, I'm stealing water. Shukran, thank you. Thank you.
You need to grab this in footage, doctor. Okay, I'm going to put this on
The
for
door has
you.
to be closed now.
Then you go around. This is like a stabilizer thing. It's a stabilizer. So it makes the footage stable. So you basically record, and then you can just walk around and it'll stay stable.
Okay. So basically just gives like a in-face stuff on.
Yeah, you can go around and have a look, like go to the different sections and show how people are sitting all over. It's recording. It's recording.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. Welcome everyone. This is obviously a hot topic. We didn't expect the numbers as they are today. I'm very sorry for the people who are at the back, the people who cannot actually see me, the people upstairs. I do apologize. I'm inclined to say, because everyone is uncomfortable, we'll wrap this up quickly, but that would defeat the purpose of you all coming here. So, inshallah, I hope that the seminar is beneficial to all of you. It's, obviously an important topic. That's why you're all here. In case you don't know, my name is Jamaluddin Khan. Seekers Guidance is a global Islamic seminary. Most of our work is online. So many of you have watched YouTube videos of Sheikh Faraz Rabbani or other scholars on YouTube, Facebook, and everywhere else. But we also have on-ground events like this. The first retreat, weekend retreat we had for Seekers Guidance in Cape Town was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. But since then we've had many other events. And this year, 2022, this is our fourth on-ground event. And I do appreciate you coming again. We didn't anticipate these numbers. We've had events here for the last 3 months, but they were not at all as well attended as today. But I guess the topic is important, and I hope, inshallah, you will get what you came for. Our two speakers today are Shaykh Irshaad Sedick and Shaykh Muhammed Carr. They are known to some of you. They are local scholars. Shaykh Irshaad is the Khatib at the Mowbray Mosque. Shaykh Muhammed Carr is the co-imam at the Awal Masjid in Bokap, alongside Shaykh Ismail Lont, who we all know and love. And apart from their duties in Cape Town on the ground, they also teach full-time at Seekers Guidance. So there are flyers. At the start of you all coming in, we gave out some flyers. If you don't have one yet, I'll make sure you'll get one later, which gives you some idea of what Seekers Guidance does. The organization was founded 15 years ago by Sheikh Faraz Rabbani, and we offer hundreds of courses, podcasts, a fit Q&A, answer service on our website, and all of this is free. Even this event here is free, and many people come to us and say, like, how is this free? Right? Even these events or even the online courses. But how it is free is that people like you and people all over the world donate to keep the operation running. right? So we have monthly donors from many different countries who support the organization because Seekers Guidance is founded on what is called knowledge without barriers. So anyone should be able to seek knowledge without having to pay anything for it. So without going on too long, Sheikh Muhammed or Sheikh Irshaad, I think, will start, inshallah. And the speakers will speak in 20-minute segments. One question came to me already. It's in my pocket. So if you have questions, later on you can raise your hand and ask them, or if you don't want to ask yourself, write it down and pass it on to me, and inshallah we'll try and answer your questions. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Shall I begin? Am I starting?
Yeah, bismillah.
Okay.
Need this?
No. I've got one. It's mic number 2. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. MashaAllah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. All praise and thanks are due solely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Choicest peace, blessings and salutations upon our master and exemplar Nabi Muhammed sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The people who are not smiling currently, is it because your spouse dragged you to this event against your will? You're sitting there like, what am I doing here? I'm supposed to be washing the soccer or something. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. We welcome you. We hope and pray that despite the challenges in the physical space, that Allah allows our coming here to be a means to create a bond of love and mercy in our marriages. Ameen. And I'd like to open up with some recitation of the Quran and then some salawat. And I'd like to ask everyone to join in. And the purpose for this is that we draw the blessings of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha specifically, and the salawat of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, because what better way to draw Allah Ta'ala's blessings for such a noble intention. We send salutations upon the greatest spouse ever to have lived, and our intention thereby is that Allah make us somewhat resemble His greatness in that capacity. Ameen. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Beloved elders, mothers, fathers, brothers and sisters in Islam, we have a number of topics allocated for today's discussions, inshallah ta'ala. Overall, we want to know how to be a better spouse. FYI, it's how to be a better spouse and not how to make my spouse a better spouse. It's a very big difference in the choice in title. But be that as it may, I would like us to sit with an intention that I would be the first to implement that which I find beneficial so that I can make the first change in the relationship. And that through my change, inshallah, my spouse will also change. And I don't want us at any given moment to say, I'm so glad my spouse is here to listen to this today because this is what they need to hear, right? So we're going to do some introspection as opposed to looking outward, inshallah ta'ala. The first discussion is the spiritual and religious element in our marriages. And for as long as anyone can remember, your imam at the nikah would speak about how important it is for the couple to have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their lives. But this is something that can be developed very practically because it is an essential element within our marriages. In the Western model of getting married, people often date, and they date for a couple of years. And the idea behind this is that they get to know one another in that process. So they get to know one another thinking that, okay, now that I know this person, we are compatible and we'll get married because now I love them, right? I love you and therefore I'm marrying you. The Islamic model is quite different to that. In Islam, there's no getting to know one another on a very intimate level before the nikah, but rather to get to know one another enough to know that you'd want to marry this person, and only to that extent, and then to get married, and thereafter the love is developed. And interestingly, as opposed to what our logical minds may tell us, we don't have that much control in how much love develops in that marriage. Let us turn to the Quran in Surah Ar-Rum, verse number 21. بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. This is a very important verse, and it will probably be the central point of my focus in my presentations today. As a translation, you can see it says, and one of his signs, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. You're familiar with the word ayat. One of Allah's ayat, not an ayah of the Quran as in a verse, but an ayah in the literal sense as in a miracle. One of the miracles of Allah, one of the signs of Allah is أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُمْ مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا, is that He created from you your spouse. And from this, we know that it's referring back to the very first creation of Nabi Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. And then from Nabi Adam, Allah Ta'ala extracted his mate, his spouse, Sayyida Hawa alayhi salatu wasalam. And in this sense, we are from one another. But we should ponder in the fact that Allah calls marriage and the phenomenon of the male and the female's compatibility with each other and how they fit together as one of His signs. So the first lesson we get from that is our marriage should be a practical sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if our marriage is far from being a sign of Allah, then hopefully today, bi'idhnillah, will provide us with some tools in order for us to make it a sign of Allah. Then the next part of the verse is لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. This lam indicates that the following word is going to give you the reason why this marriage, this matrimonial bond is a sign. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. So that you may find sakina, so that you may find tranquility ilayha, with her. It's addressing the male, but the counterpart is just as applicable. So that the male can find his peace, his tranquility, his sakina, his coolness with his wife. And that the woman can find her sakina. Sakina is tranquility. Sikina is a knife. Make sure you know the difference. So that they can find the tranquility with one another. And this is partly why in Islam we believe that marriage completes half of your faith. It gives you the opportunity to complete half of your faith because you find yourself in a space where you deal with certain human urges that we all have in a halal manner, and thereby it does not affect your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It allows you the platform to build your character and to become the true version of yourself that you need to be, that you should strive to be. Because your character development has a lot to do with how you treat your spouse in a marriage. And this is something that we will look at in greater detail. And then the focal point of the verse is وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةَ وَرَحْمَةً. He, Allah, وَجَعَلَ. This word ja'ala means to make. And the doer of this particular word is the huwa that is hidden inside of it, going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is He, Allah, who places between you, بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةَ وَرَحْمَةً. He places between you love and mercy. So from this we understand that it is not the premarital dating that caused the love and mercy to get into the marriage. That goes out of the window the very next day after the marriage takes place. Because then you realize, oh, this is who you actually are. And the reality of that person becomes manifest only after nikah, regardless of how many years of impermissible dating had taken place prior to that. Right? Because for all of those years, this person was able to put up a facade of who they are in front of you, and then they go home and the facade comes off. But now, when they go home, you're right there. So when the facade comes off, you get to see it. And you come to realize that this person isn't the perfect person you once thought they were on dating. Rather, this person is a human being with weaknesses and strengths, just like me. But regardless of those things, those some negative and some positive qualities that you witness, somehow, through the barakah of marriage, if it is done correctly, Allah Azza wa Jal places between the couple mawaddata wa rahma, love and mercy. But the key thing to note here is that the source of the love and the source of the mercy is attributed not to the husband nor to the wife, but to Allah. So based on this understanding, we know that when the husband and the wife seeks to strengthen their individual relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, something amazing happens. And really, if this is all we took away from this seminar today, I believe it would be enough. And that is that when the husband and wife draw closer to Allah, Allah will draw them closer to each other. And for as long as the husband and the wife strive to gain proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that marriage, bi'idhnillah, will always improve. How so? You see, the big problem in this concept is that people often confuse and conflate religious development and spiritual development. Both are important, but they are distinctly different in terms of its practical application. For the husband can be someone who makes salah 5 times a day at the masjid and reads his Quran and attends classes of learning, attends circles of dhikrullah. The wife, she reads her du'as, she makes her dhikrullah, she's obedient in the home, she makes, she serves her family, whatever the case may be, whatever roles they decide they're going to take for one another, fulfilling their religious responsibilities. And then we imagine that because I'm doing all these external acts of ibadah, that automatically my marriage is going to be amazing. But the problem is that sometimes our physical acts of worship are void of the spiritual nourishment that it needs in order to be complete. Because every act of ibadah has an external, a physical component. For example, a car has the body, but then it also has an internal component that really drives it. A car also has an engine. And if somebody were to give you a birthday present of the body of a Ferrari and nothing else, that would be an interesting gift. So when we develop religiously in terms of our ibadah, what is also very important is that that religious application must have a spiritual impact. And if it does not have a spiritual impact on our character, on our akhlaq, then something is missing in the equation. So religious development should be seen because we unfortunately, compartmentalize these things, but it should be seen as a two-pronged approach, spiritual and religious development. And if a couple seeks to spiritually develop themselves, which means the process of tazkiyah to nafs is alive in their lives. They are constantly seeking to determine what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are, and to grow their strengths, nurture it, and to keep their weaknesses at bay. If they are constantly striving for that, they will constantly improve in their relationship. Because tazkiyah, a personal development process in Islam, is necessarily going to make you a better person. And this is spiritual development in essence. So besides your praying at the masjid, reading your Quran, waking up for tahajjud, you need to ensure that these acts of worship are not void of the spiritual elements that they need to contain. And this isn't a one-sided approach, because unfortunately, if you can imagine on this same triangle, if the husband were to go up and develop himself religiously and spiritually, but the wife doesn't, or vice versa, then the distance between them remains either the same, or it could even become widened. And this is often the case. We find sometimes the man, sometimes the woman, they develop themselves, they start learning, they change their lives, they improve their character. But their partner isn't playing the game along with them. And then the marriage seems to be drifting apart. So, a practical way that we can look at this from the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a dua that we often recite, says, وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Allah speaks about the servants of Ar-Rahman in Surah Al-Furqan, verse number 74. Surah number 25, verse number 74. This dua that we all know, that we've all recited, that we all hear very frequently, contains certain lessons for us all. The first lesson is that we know from this supplication that Allah wants us to pray for our marriage, because the dua is taught to us in the Quran. So Allah is instructing us to pray for your marriage. So we should be from among those who make this dua. Okay, so that's very superficial, surface level, but we need to pray for our marriage. If you are not already doing so, specifically make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for your marriage. But now look at the contents of this dua. This dua teaches us certain things as well. And in every case where there's a supplication in the Quran or the Sunnah, where there's a dua, there's actually a lesson in that as well. Because it is the divine instruction from Allah that these are the things you should be striving for. These should be your goals. How so? If Allah tells you, ask me for this, then that is an indication to you, I should be striving for this. So over and above asking for it, we should also strive for it. And this dua teaches us that we should strive to find the coolness of our eyes, the sakina, the qurratu a'yun, the coolness of our eyes in our spouse. This may sound simple, but at the same time, if you think about the results that this would lead to, it means that I don't find more coolness of my eyes in anything else. I find the primary source of the sakina, the tranquility and the coolness of my eyes in my spouse and in my kids. That when I go home, my home and my family is the source of me just letting my hair down and just feeling free and feeling at peace. Not when I put myself in front of Netflix, or when I drop down in front of the television, or when I'm chilling with my friends and watching sport, or when I'm out and about, finding a different pastime. Those things are all fine sometimes, but I should never neglect that the primary source of tranquility and coolness of my eyes should be within my marriage and with my family. Not my secretary, not my neighbor's wife, not the women that I see walking across the road when I drive to work. It should be within my own family. We also learn from this dua that at the same time that we should find the coolness of our eyes in our spouse, we should be the coolness of our eyes for our spouse. We should be such people that when our husband, our wife sees us, they feel, Alhamdulillah, my baby is at home. Now I can smile. Now my loneliness is gone. They shouldn't be like, oh, ya Allah, here we go again. Okay, take a deep breath. Let's prepare yourself for this. Bismillah. And even worse, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. That shouldn't be the case. You should strive to be the coolness of your spouse's eyes. They should be looking forward to the moment they see you in the day. And of course, as we go through today's discussions, we will find out more about how to do that. Then, moving on from that, we look at وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا, and make us the leaders of the righteous. Make us the leaders of the righteous. Who's the us? If you think about the dua, who's being instructed to make this dua? The husband and the wife. It says, make myself and my wife the leaders of the righteous. Who are the righteous? The children. So this dua is also teaching us that not only should we embody taqwa Allah, but we should seek to be the leaders of taqwa. And striving to lead in taqwa is an intrinsic part of the success plan of the marriage. And before we conclude with this slide and move over to the next session, the last point is this element of taqwa. Because in the previous slide, when we looked at drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you may ask the question, okay, so how do you do that going up thing there? Right? Not on the slide. In reality, how do you go up and draw closer to your Rabb subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's only one word. And that word is taqwa. And to remind us all, what is taqwa? In essence, taqwa is هي ملكة تحمل صاحبها على امتثال أوامر الله واجتناب نواهيه. Taqwa is that internal characteristic that drives you away from Allah's prohibitions, and it drives you to fulfilling your obligations. So your first step in drawing closer to Allah and therefore drawing closer to your spouse, your first step, before we speak about sex, before we speak about in-laws, before we speak about money, all of which are topics today, the first step to improving your relationship is for both husband and wife to make a serious commitment that we will strive to stay away from haram. We will eliminate from our marriage haram. Some of the ugliest stuff, like extramarital affairs, extramarital relationships that has not yet amounted to affairs, watching of pornography, masturbation in secret without the spouse knowing, right? Or even if the spouse knows, for that matter, self-stimulation in that sense. Any type of vulgar treatment of the opposite in the relationship. Husband swearing at the wife, wife swearing at the husband, physical harm, emotional harm, verbal abuse. Eliminate the absolutely haram from your relationship, because that's the first step. Before you start asking, what can we do to improve our relationship? What can we do? First ask, what should we stop doing? Because if you don't eliminate the haram from your lives, the spiritual growth is going to have no effect. It's like having huge holes in a leather bag and then trying to fill the leather bag with water. The water being the taqwa, the good deeds, the extra effort, and the holes being the sins that you commit, individually and together. Husbands and wives, this bond of matrimony in Islam is a spiritual bond. It's a religious bond. Your nikah is an act of ibadah. The act of nikah, in other words, sex, is an act of ibadah in Islam. If you contaminate this act of ibadah, nikah, marriage, sexual intercourse, your marital life, if you contaminate it with haram, unfortunately, you stint your growth from the very outset. And with that, we conclude the first session. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Is it really? So further on? Can go ahead. You're not getting through. Okay, khair. Okay. So Manu?
Sheikh Muhammad Carr, inshallah, will take the next segment, and it's about conflicts relating to intimacy. He's just getting ready. While we wait, are there any questions that you want to ask? Okay, no questions yet. I'm sure they will come. So inshallah, just give us 30 seconds and then Sheikh Muhammad Carr will proceed.
You know. Should.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطاهرين ما دام ما في السماوات والأرضين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم إنا نسألك علما ينفعنا ارفعنا. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا واسعا وعملا متقبلا وشفاء من كل داء. وبعد، Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His many blessings that He has bestowed upon us. And I think it's only pertinent to mention the blessing of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this beautiful facility of marriage whereby husband and wife come together. And in many parts of the Holy Quran, as you have probably heard now, and you will hear in the course of our presentation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to marriage as one of His signs. And the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are great in terms of the magnitude, though in many instances we are unable to appreciate the magnitude of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm quite nervous actually, to be honest with you, because of the nature of what we're going to discuss. So I'd like to keep it as simple, as interactive as possible bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So at any stage during the course of the presentation, if you have a question or a comment or I'm struggling along a certain line, please feel free to engage, inshallah. We're going to be talking about intimacy in marriage, and the idea behind the presentation is to look ultimately at certain points of conflict in relation to intimacy and how we can be either proactive ideally or in certain instances reactive in order to resolve that conflict that might relate to intimacy. I think intimacy is a sort of best type of word to use, and I may use one of the more mutaradifat synonyms for it as we go along bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what we ultimately want to discuss. As an introduction to that, I thought of this particular verse because it creates the construct amongst ourselves. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa, there are two Surah An-Nisas in the Quran. One is the shorter version and the other one is the longer version. In Surah An-Nisa, which is the longer version, a verse which you are very familiar with, because those of us who are married, and I'm sure you've attended a marriage ceremony, they would basically recite this either in terms of the talk or in the sermon. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَّفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالًا كَثِيرًا وَنِسَاءً وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلَيْكُمْ رَقِيبًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to us that we, O people, be Allah conscious. And then Allah mentions that He is the one who created you from a single soul. So we are connected to one another. I don't know how the order of the slides go. Okay. So the first slide is basically just to impress upon us that we are connected to one another. Allah created us from a single soul. We will also discuss later in terms of Hawa being created from Adam. And we'll also look at the fact that Hawa, as per the narration, is created from the rib that has a slight bend in it. We will talk about that later, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we're connected in this particular way. Allah created us from a single soul, and then Allah created the genders, which are males and females. Now, so we are all connected. Some person said, and I'm not looking for family, but sort of you, my 44th cousin, at the furthest stretch, so we're all connected. So if your husband and wife is your 44th cousin plus your husband and wife. The next thing would be the other verse of the Holy Quran, which I thought to mention by way of introduction, would be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about creating mankind in a particular way. Is this the right slide? Oh, yes it is. Okay. So the next slide by way of introduction would be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created us as mankind, established already. And then we come from a particular ethnicity, we come from a particular race. And within that particular race, we find the family unit. So I'm just wanting to create a sort of conceptualization from a Quranic perspective in terms of human beings as a whole. Human beings, Allah created us,
But then Allah divided us into different tribes, into different races, different ethnicities. Within that broader picture, what do you have? You have family. But when we think of family, we sort of think of the broad family. But if you limit that family to who you are right in front of me, I see there are many couples here, then that could possibly be, if you had your children with you, then we'd refer to that as a nuclear family. So we have human beings as a race. That race is divided into different ethnicities, different races. That is made up of different families. That families is basically husband, wife, and children. But for this afternoon, we don't really want to worry about the children, which is your nuclear family, yourself, your husband, and your children. What we want to zone into really would be the husband and the wife. So therefore, I have the question at the bottom, where does it all start? So if I went from the top, human beings, race, family, and nuclear family, husband and wife, but if you really look at it, then the seeds are basically the husband and the wife. So it basically all starts from yourself and your spouse. Now, I'm going to look from the cog side of things. It doesn't have any significance except for the fact that there was 3 things and I could fit the 3 things into there. And it did look like a cog, and I thought, things are supposed to work all together, like cogs in a wheel. So we understand that we are a family, but there's many challenges. So that's why I have the thing of loggerheads. As husband and wife, we're supposed to be complementing each other, but we're at loggerheads. We, from an Islamic perspective, are supposed to play a complementary role. And I mentioned to you earlier on in the first verse that we're going to talk about the rib that has a bend in it. And do excuse me if I say further on a crooked rib, it's going to be a slip of the tongue. But you can look at it in a different way. It's got a bend, it's crooked. No matter how you look at it, or whatever terms you're going to use, it's something that's, there's a bend in it. So, the first statement I'm making is that we're supposed to play complementary roles. Some of our scholars, they actually look at the whole phenomenon of a rib. And a lady has been created from that rib that has a bend in it. Why is that? Our scholars say that it's because a lady always is inclined towards others. They have a natural inclination towards others. When she's in the home that she's born into, she inclines towards her parents, being of service to her parents. When she gets married, she inclines towards her husband, naturally. When she has children, she inclines towards her children. So that, our scholars say, is the wisdom behind that particular aspect of creation. That's a very positive way to look into it. Now, if we were to complement each other, we spoke how the lady inclines towards the man. So some of our scholars point out what the husband needs now is a rib. The rib is they need the lung. So why do they mention about the lung? What do you use the lungs for? You use your lungs to breathe, right? So it goes back to Hawa. Now, this may not be academically correct, but the idea for us is to take lesson therefrom. And even if it was a fable, it's not academically correct, the important point is the principle that we draw from the following anecdote or from the following story. Hawa basically means breath, or if you wanted to, a breath of fresh air. So if the lady inclines to the husband, like in a bent way, then she lets off a particular fragrance. What is left to the husband now is to breathe in that fragrance. So if the husband is not inclined to the wife, maybe he needs a bigger set of lungs. It reminds me of my brother, just to make an example, we had a Toyota old one, slant front, TRD, and it had these carbs, carburetors, but the big ones, Weber ones. So you're taking more petrol. So what happens is, the lady inclined towards the husband must have that set of lungs that he can breathe in. You with me? And in that way we complement each other. So the principle, what I'm trying to impress upon you over here is that we are not in competition with one another, but rather we're there to complement each other. And that's why I have all the challenges on the side. It's very difficult because you're actually working against the grain if you want a complementary marriage. It actually works against the society. You're walking against the tide. Because the current environment, it sort of either directly or indirectly spurs you on to create conflict. And that's because of ideas like secularism, which ultimately leads to individualism. It's all about me. So you إِنَّمَا بَغْيُكُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ. You seek to fulfill your rights. But what happens is, you're not balanced enough that you seek to fulfill your rights, but in the process you transgress the other's rights. So that's not complementary. So this unbridled individualism creates a problem. It's out there. We can see it and it influences how, this is my right. And I'm going to stand by my haqq. It's my haqq. It's an interesting thing because the Prophet ﷺ, when that argument was presented to him, and a person took an oath by Allah that I'm going to stand my right, the Prophet ﷺ, where's that person that's taken an oath by Allah that he will not stand down? So standing down in many instances is a virtue, as opposed to being insistent that I want my rights. And Allah knows best. And the last idea is in terms of equality. If we're equal, we can't be complementary. And that's the type of idea that you have, all this must be equal. You know? So fight fire with fire, it shouldn't be like that. We should be complementary to each other. In other words, if the husband comes home and is all fire, compliment him by being the water. Douse the fire. But if he's coming, you know, and he's had a rough day, then I'll show you where the rougher day, you know. That shouldn't be, and Allah SWT knows best. So you get the idea between the first two slides, inshallah. Just getting an idea in terms of who we are, where we fit in the broader picture, and ultimately we should be complementing each other. Now, we had thought about this particular presentation, and we thought, in terms of presenting, many times we speak very generally about certain verses and certain narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, but somehow or the other we're unable to bring it to bear to the challenges that we have. So this idea is to really talk about the challenges that we have in terms of intimacy, and then allocate the narrations and allocate the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ that are relevant. So when we look at marriage, what I want to prove from this particular slide is really the last one. The benefits of marriage, if you wanted to, the benefits of marriage is the objective of marriage, if you wanted to. But Imam Ghazali mentions it as fawaid, as benefits, so therefore I follow his cue and mention it as benefits. I want to look at the last one, a stated benefit. A stated benefit, in other words, a stated objective of marriage is to satisfy one's sexual desire, in other words, to fulfill one's carnal need. It's one of the primary reasons why a person gets married. But since we are on the topic, we might as well very quickly look at the others. Why does a person get married? For procreation. You want to extend. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged us, تَنَاكَحُوا تَنَاسَلُوا تَكْثُرُوا, that we should get married and we should procreate, because it will be a source of pride for the Prophet ﷺ, the amount of children that we have. That can also be a point of conflict, and it's very important to understand knowledge in that particular perspective. Husband wants 100 children, wife only wants one, and both have valid arguments. Like if you want 100, who's going to look after them? That's a valid question. So procreation, number one. Number two is managing the household. Managing the household. This is stated. Disciplining the self, and this is very important for us. Muslims get married, why? Because it's an exercise in disciplining the self. How do you discipline the self? Because before you get married, we'll talk about this a bit later, you were only one person, I culture. Now you come to a we culture. Before you didn't have any responsibilities, and now you have responsibilities. Before you were married, you sleep in a single bed. Now you sleep in a double bed. Double bed, double responsibilities. So double responsibilities means that you have to wake up every Monday morning, whether you feel like it or not, you have to go to work because you have to give nafaqah. And then the next issue, and it's a pride, as a Muslim male person, it's a pride. Companionship, and very importantly, to satisfy one's sexual need. I couldn't just tell you it's about satisfying the sexual need, because then you say, am I at the right seminar or not? Okay, so the next thing would be that in fulfillment of our needs, I want to create just a broad framework around fulfillment of your carnal desire and your need. Number one, it's a stated objective of getting married. So what is the wisdom of the fulfillment of desire? So you fulfill your desire, you fulfill your carnal need. Other than just having intercourse with the idea of procreation, what does it lead to? Ultimately, if you have sexual intercourse with your spouse, right? The climax of sexual intercourse is for you to experience an orgasm. It's a particular sensation. Now, had it not been for Imam Ghazali, I would not have been as brazen as to mention this issue as I'm mentioning it now. When you come together, you're having conjugal relations, the purpose behind that is to experience a certain sensation. And that sensation is referred to an orgasm. The sensation of orgasm is an unparalleled sensation. The only problem with it is it's very short-lived. It's momentarily. If only it could last longer, you say to yourself, or you may even share it with your spouse. So this experience that you would have, now Imam Ghazali rahimahullah talks about it, and he says that it actually indicates to the pleasures of paradise. If you didn't have the orgasm experience in this world, then how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lure you into the gardens of bliss, where you're going to be having the same experience, but it's going to be optimized. It's going to be a superlative experience. So if you didn't have that experience in this world, then how is it that you're going to yearn for it in the year after? So when you have an orgasm and you experience that sensation, it creates within you the yearning to experience this at a superlative level. And in order for you to experience it at a superlative level, it means you have to enter into paradise. But if you want to enter into paradise, you need to, in this worldly state, get out of the bed where you had the orgasm in and pray. So something which seems to be very mundane, and this is, our scholars, they had, this is a taste that you need to experience in terms of something which is very physical and might be mundane, but the underlying spiritual benefits that it has. So in other words, I could very well say that the greater orgasm that you have, the greater the incentive to pray. Because you're measuring it in terms of this is what I'm going to get here, what I'm going to get in the year after. Now, so something to consciously work towards. So if you do not have the sensation, you would not yearn for a greater sensation. And this becomes the incentive to worship Allah. So again, if you look at this slide, I really just want to come to the last part. And Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, I'm going to quote this, and I'm coming to the end of my presentation, bi'idhnillah, just two more. And he says, فَانْظُرْ إِلَى الْحِكْمَةِ ثُمَّ إِلَى الرَّحْمَةِ ثُمَّ إِلَى التَّعْبِئَةِ الْإِلَهِيَّةِ. So, you know, any given thing in the world, Imam Ghazali, I haven't quoted it here, but he mentions there's nothing in the world that if you look at it, it may appear to be very superficial, but it's actually very, very profound. Any given phenomenon that you think about. I was reading an unrelated verse, which we might discuss later on. You are created from a liquid. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ مِنَ الْمَاءِ. I'm just using that example, a liquid. And obviously we're referring to a particular liquid here referred to as sperm. Well, how much do you think about sperm? You don't think much about sperm unless you're having an issue. And that's also an important thing to look at, and it can be remedied. But if you look at that liquid, what Allah has kept within that liquid, and if you study it, probably a doctor is with us, you probably have to do a PhD in order, and you still will not uncover what Allah SWT has kept in that small sperm. You follow me? So now when we look at this seemingly mundane activity of husband and wife getting together, and the orgasm that you're supposed to be experiencing, right? When we look at that, what do we find? Wisdoms. We find mercy. And we find divinely hidden secrets, if you so wanted to. And the secret is what Imam Ghazali expounded before, but I'm just reproducing his text over here. So what does he say? In having intimacy, what do we have? You have two forms of life in there. Two forms of enlivenment. Have you ever thought about having conjugal relations and it's actually an enlivenment? If you think about it, even on a health level, your blood level increases. And then blood level increases like almost going for a run. It's the same thing, it's very healthy. Well, it has positives, you don't have to leave the house. So there's enlivenment in that. And there's apparent and there's hidden. So Imam Ghazali first talks about the apparent enlivenment. What is it? If you engage in conjugal relations, you procreate, and therefore there's an enlivenment. In other words, you have progeny. But there is another form of enlivenment which is more important. What is that? That is the enlivenment, in other words, seeking to gain the everlasting life. وَإِنَّ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةَ لَهِيَ الْحَيَوَانِ. The ever-living life. And so whatever living life do you experience, if this is the enjoyment I'm experiencing in this world, then what about the year after? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. I'm just going to stop there, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For time constraints, I think my time is almost up. I got about 2-3 minutes left. So the entire presentation thus far was just to give you a context to what we are talking about. How does this come down to intimacy? But now when it comes to intimacy, there's many times conflict. And that is really the question that we want to talk to bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we will look at that. So the first thing, we want to create a synergy between ourselves, between husband and wife. Because we want to be amongst those who experience what is to be experienced in terms of conjugal relations, with the idea of the enlivenment that relates to this world and the enlivenment that relates to the year after. In other words, we want to have that experience. Every time that you have conjugal relation, you want to have that experience. I'm giving life in this worldly form, but I'm also giving life to my yearning to be in paradise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to create that synergy, we need to move from the I culture to the we culture. Now creating that synergy, we need to take practical steps. You may be in conflict with your wife in this particular regard. It may be that your, I don't know what the word is. It may be that you have a higher libido than what your partner has. So if you ascertain that, like you astounded as to the sexual need that your partner has, look for an explanation. Your partner in turn is not astounded, is greatly saddened by the low libido that you may have. So what are the practical steps in terms of looking at the situation? And you find that Cape Town, you have, cannot help but think of Dr. Mujib, that talks about different body temperaments. That is a great contributory factor to that. And so if you have a certain temperament and your diet doesn't complement that temperament, let's say you have a high libido, so what's going to happen is, if you don't have the proper diet, then it's just going to skyrocket. And it might create conflict in terms of the relationship. Whereas if you had a different diet that maybe balanced you out a bit, and then, from the I culture to the we culture. So even in terms of looking after ourselves, you can accommodate that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Number two, so I spoke about diet, and I also spoke about internal health. We are very concerned about our external well-being. But when it comes to conflict in marriage, it could very well be that we may look good from the outside, but internally we're not doing too well. So for both male folk as well as women folk, that when the opportunity arises, then, or at different stages, like you go for regular checkups relating to certain other things, you and I, we need to go for regular checkups in as far as our internal health is concerned. And what I mean by internal health here would be in relation to your reproductive organs. And I think for males it's fairly simple, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. It can become complicated, so if there is a complication, it means we need to look into that particular situation, lest it be that we're not fulfilling the carnal desire of our spouses. And the same with the female. I mean, you can go to a gynecologist and she can give you like 100% clean bill of health in as far as your internal organs are concerned. And your internal well-being, particularly for a lady, in relation to sexual intercourse is fundamentally important. And we sometimes don't really worry about that. And then I think last but not least, we're having conflict in how do we, I'm not looking at the conflicts directly, but how can we avoid the conflicts? And one of the most beautiful ways, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, would be a service-orientated approach. And what I mean by service would be khidmah. And if you haven't tried this already, it's the most beautiful way, not only about going about in relating to your spouse, but in your everyday life, a service-orientated approach, meaning that I must be of service to others. I'm not going out requiring others to be of service to me. And we find when we have this approach to our relationship, it's proven categorically. If a husband, for example, sleeps with his wife, so if he is preoccupied with fulfilling my desire, he can do that. And we know that biologically, physiologically, we are made up very different. For example, for a husband, excuse my language, may go from 0 to hero in 60 seconds. Physiologically, that's just how he's made up. But a lady, on the other hand, on average, it takes you about 10, 15 minutes to basically get into the swing of things, if you follow what I'm saying. Now, if a husband goes and his idea is, I'm just going to fulfill my desire. So he fulfills his desire in 1 minute. The lady hasn't even warmed up. She needs to about 10, 15 minutes. You with me? And the unique part about it is that when we have this approach to our relationships, and you are of mind and heart to fulfill the desire of your partner, what happens is your experience gets augmented. It's the unique thing about, it's like, for example, like what's the best way to keep happy? By making yourself happy or making others happy. We know that. It gives you a greater sense of achievement when you, sometimes at your own cost, يُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ, that you give others preference over yourself. It does so much more to you than if you had to buy yourself that ice cream when you bought it for somebody else. So likewise here, that when you have this particular approach that I'm there not to fulfill my own desire, yes, my desire is going to be fulfilled in the process, but ultimately to fulfill the desire of my spouse. We find this type of approach, this type of outlook, it's empirically proven to be the better type of approach, but it's a frame of mind. It's a frame of mind. And I think many times that unfortunately what may create unnecessary conflict within a marriage is that if, for example, a husband comes into the marriage with this type of approach, and he always has his desire fulfilled, but the lady is left unfulfilled, which means that a stated objective of marriage, which is to fulfill not only your desire, because the Sharia hasn't come only to fulfill your rights, but the rights of everybody. So this idea of coming to the marriage with, my idea is to fulfill my spouse's desire, and my spouse's idea is to fulfill my desire, a service-orientated approach, not only to marriage, but to all of our relationships, that goes a far way. And over and above that, it is one of the greatest things that endears you to Allah. And one of the quickest ways to get closeness to Allah. We saw how an orgasm can be a means of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What about if you take out the time? And maybe to end off on this, it's something that always struck me. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Fi budi ahadikum sadaqah." You know, when you go to fulfill your desire, that is a sadaqah. So if you just grab that word sadaqah out of there, you know, Allah tells you in the Quran that if you want to give charity, لا تيمموا الخبيث, don't look at, you know, the least of your wealth and give that in charity. In other words, the best of your wealth, take that and give it into charity. So if having conjugal relations is a form of charity, must you put your best version forward or your worst version forward? Ibn Abbas would say that, like I expect my wife to prepare for me, likewise, I expect I would prepare myself for that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. I was watching the time. You have a question? Okay, inshallah, but now my speech is over, and I hope I kept to the time, because I was trying very hard. It showed me 10 minutes ago that it was 10 minutes, so by now it should be to finish in the story. Time went clear. On time. Alhamdulillah. Bismillah. Okay, so there's a very nice question in terms of, so you want to have a service-orientated culture in terms of the marriage. You know, I'm going to be of service to you, you're going to be of service to me. But, you know, do you hand yourself over completely? You know, you become like the leaf in the wind. Wherever it blows, it blows. So wherever I'm required. Is that the extent to which you should be of service to others? You guys look like you got the answer. It's a bit of a difficult thing. I know what is the right thing, but it's a bit of a difficult thing to explain. And it's all about balance. Because you can't be of service to another person to the extent that certain other things become compromised. For example, you're of service to another, but now your dignity is called into question. So there are a lot of considerations that balance out the idea of being of service to another. You know, yes, you should, even in terms of honoring another person, some of our scholars are quite strict about it, that you honor the person, but not to the degree that you abase yourself. So that is, you know, a sort of a good balance and a good measure. And then another measure would also be like, if you look at the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, he said that if I were to command someone to fall prostrate to someone, it would be the the wife to the husband, but he didn't command it. So why I'm mentioning that is because we also have the Sharia, and the Sharia creates parameters for us. That's an important consideration. You want to know what is the parameters, what do I need to do, what don't I need to do, right? It shouldn't come that our relationships are like, what do I need to do, what I don't need to do. Okay, I must give you 3 kisses. There we go, that's it. No, because if it comes to that and you just implore the law, your relationship is on the rocks. But at the same time also the Sharia does serve as that parameter, to what degree should I go to. So there also it balances out this whole idea of being of service to another. It mustn't be to a degree that it leads to your abasement and so forth. A very important thing, what happened was, on one occasion, and this youngster, I was interacting with him, and he taught me a beautiful thing. He was asking me, some of the bedroom antics, so normally I tell the brothers, don't hang from the chandelier on the first night, This is a long-term relationship, so take it easy. So what happened was that he was asking me about the legal parameters. Can I do this? Can I do that? So very importantly, together with that, what I was trying to tell him was, look, you have the law, but you're also dealing with a person. And the person has certain likes and dislikes. And in any given relationship, if you want to maintain the relationship, you're not going to invoke the law, even though the law may be on your side. You're going to be sensitive enough to say, look, my wife's not comfortable with that. And sometimes it can be a very easy thing, like keeping the light on. If you could have floodlights, you'd love it. But, no. So, it's important to, the law is there. But then he told me, and so I told him that was my part of my bayan. But he told me, no. I also need to know what the parameters of the Sharia are. And that talks to your question, because I really want to know. Because the Sharia gives us guidelines. The Sharia tells us, these are the guardrails. Don't go beyond that. You're going to land in trouble if you go beyond those particular boundaries. So it's that balance. And Allah SWT knows best. I hope I shed some light on that question. I'll see you later. I've got another session.
It's funny how the room feels much more steamy now than it did a couple of minutes ago. But if anybody wants to, you may stand and stretch yourself out before I commence with my part of the talk. That's perfectly fine. So just, get the blood moving. If anybody wants to take a bathroom break, you may. But I'm going to begin. The next part of this presentation is going to be about communication. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. When it comes to the Quran and the Sunnah, it is surprisingly not very prescriptive about how we should be in our relationship. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the Quran and the Sunnah is not very prescriptive as to the everyday interactions between a man and a woman? Think about that for a moment. The reality is human beings are different. Right? Even if you were to look at the temperaments and we could understand certain characteristics of a bilious temperament, for example, and certain characteristics of a melancholic temperament, still the individuals who possess those temperaments are going to be different. So the Quran doesn't come and say the husband should say I love you to the wife 5 times a day. Nor does the Sunnah come and say to the wife, when your husband has a headache, he doesn't want a Panado, he wants you to rub his head. It doesn't say that. What the Quran does say is, وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Live with them bil-ma'ruf. This word ma'ruf is an interesting one. The root letters are ayn, rafa, arafa, which means to know. And then when placed on this form, ma'ruf, it means in a way that everyone knows that's good. Just like what Maulana was saying a moment ago, when it comes to, in terms of what's good and what's not good for the bedroom. Instead of just asking about what the Sharia allows and what it does not allow, what are his likes and preferences? And what are her likes and preferences? And then to come to a common understanding on that, this would be ma'ruf. Ma'ruf would be determining how often you're going to spend time together, right? And I'm doing that because men and women have completely different understandings of what that is. And for a man, if you say, spend time together, I live with you. How much time can I possibly spend more than that? But she means something completely different thereby, right? She's looking for quality time. There's the magic word. So, ma'ruf is a process. And this is so beautiful because, you know, the verse that we looked at previously gave us also very broad strokes as far as the process is concerned. And it is a beautiful miracle of the Quran and Islam and marriage. Allah just said, love and mercy. Mawaddata wa rahmah. But we can make tafsir of love as to how it fits a particular couple. And then we can make tafsir of mercy and how it fits a particular couple. Now I'm going to go through an exercise of that tafsir with all of you to give you an example of how you and your partner can come to an agreement of this ma'ruf. What works for us? And it's very important that you understand that as a couple you are unique. Just the other day, it's now the 26th of November, 4 days ago, believe it or not, myself and my wife, we celebrated our 15th year of marriage, alhamdulillah. So I started feeling a bit qualified to give this presentation. Before that, I was like, no, I'm still newlywed. But we came to learn a number of things. Early on in the marriage, we would look at other couples and think, mashallah, you know, that is how a couple should be. Honestly. And we learned our lesson in that eventually you come to discover that things are not as hunky-dory as they seem. But when it comes to your own relationship, what are the processes that one could follow to establish sound communication based on ma'ruf, mutual goodness, fair treatment and kindness? So to begin, when you got married, the Imam recited 3 verses in the Quran. One of them stated, وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا يُصْلِحْ لَكُمْ أَعْمَالَكُمْ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ. Beautiful verse. Often left untranslated because it's part of the khutbatun nikah. But what does it mean? It means speak a straight word. Speak a straight word. If you mean here, then don't go there. Be clear. Kun sarihan takunu sa'idan. Be clear, you will be happy. Be clear on each other's likes, dislikes, strengths, and weaknesses. You can find many books on this topic about love languages and so on. But it is critically important. Now we are talking about love here. You see the word love is highlighted in red. Before we get to rahmah, we need to look at love. Expressions of love. The problem with expressions of love is we often try to express love in the way that we want to express love. But in reality, what our partner expects is that we express love in the way they want us to express love. So if you are a sports person as a husband now, and your wife buys you a day at the spa for a manicure and a pedicure to show how much she loves you, that's not going to be a very well-received gift. And similarly, if she's not a very sports-orientated person, but you buy her tickets to the rugby for your anniversary, it's not going to go down so well. But what you need to do is understand, look, my wife doesn't actually like it when I slap her on the behind. She wants me to touch it gently. So therefore, I'm going to have to learn to communicate in that way. She doesn't like flowers, even though I was brought up thinking that buying flowers is an act of love. For her, it's a waste of money because the flowers just stand there and it dies. And I mean, she prefers the chocolate. So why insist that you want to buy the flowers? Find your partner's likes and dislikes and show your love through the way they want you to express love. A husband who he's not cultured into believing that he should say, I love you all the time, which is, by the way, part of the sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you love your brother, then tell him that you love him. So how much more with your wife or with your husband, right? So be that as it may, some people, they just don't like saying, I love you. They didn't grow up with Barney. But the reality is, you need to learn to express love in the way she likes, and she needs to learn to express love in the way that you like. If your idea as the man is you want your wife to show love by her welcoming you home with a smile and a hug and asking you how your day was and giving you a shoulder rub, does she know that that's what you want? Have you ever expressed it as explicitly and as clearly as that? Listen here, this is what I like. I really like this a lot. In a very decent and wise way, of course. And similarly for the wives, you may think that he's supposed to know to hug you 5 times a day or to say explicitly, I love you so much, more than life itself. If you want that from him, you need to be clear and make it known that this is how I want you to love me. This is how I'm going to feel love. And if you don't make it clear, then unfortunately you have very little leg to stand on in arguing that he or she doesn't express love to me. You also need to learn as quickly as possible that your partner, your wife, your husband, is not an angel, nor are they a devil, even though evidence may prove otherwise at times. The reality is you married a human being. And a human being has strengths and weaknesses. There will be elements and factors with your partner that you love, and there will be others that will work on your nerves. Find their strengths, find the things that you love in them, and focus on them, and you will find it easier to express love. Mutually agree on the do's and don'ts. This is ma'roof. If you have a list of things that, look here, this is completely intolerable. Now, we're not talking about halal and haram. That is agreed upon, right? A couple should know that certain things are halal, certain things are haram. There's no compromise there. But he may have certain preferences and she may have certain preferences that are unique to them. Call it idiosyncrasies, call it peculiar habits or traits. Learn them. They're there. They're probably not going to go away anytime soon. And if you try to make them go away, it's like bending what's the word Maulana used about the rib? The slightly curved rib. Bending it is going to result in its breaking. Rather accept that there's a curl there. It's a nice curl. Accept it, embrace it. But mutually agrees on the do's and the don'ts. Like this is a no-no and this is a must-have. And if you can mutually agree on those things, not to say you will always live by those standards, but you have a platform from which to work. And the sooner you can get these conversations going, the better it will be for your relationship. Number 3, part of love is that you need to create a space for love. If you're always living past one another, you're an evening person, she's a morning person. You do daytime shift, she does nighttime shift. You go out with your friends on the weekend, she goes out with the mother on the weekend, etc. And you don't make time for the relationship. How is it possible for you to foster love in this relationship? So you need to create the space for expressing love. Expressing it in both words and actions as to how your partner prefers. This means that if need be, have a date night. Have several date nights. Agree on those dates. And reserve it as much as you would reserve a meeting space that you cannot compromise on. Don't compromise on your date night, or your date lunch, or your holiday together. But with any relationship, it requires time and effort that you need to put into it in order for it to work. Then, obviously, without saying, without needing to say it, your lists of do's, don'ts, preferences, likes, dislikes, you're not always going to be able to live by those standards, right? You as the husband, you'll sometimes forget that she really wants you to pick up your clothes after you take them off. And sometimes you will forget. Maybe she pushes the toothpaste up from the top of the tube, and she's going to forget to push it up from the bottom of the tube. So when these things happen, it's going to require a feedback loop. It's going to require that, look, remember how we agreed on that thing that I really don't like? Yeah, you kind of did that thing that I really don't like. But if you have a mutual understanding, then when this feedback happens, when your wife comes to you and she's telling you about something that really, really ticked her off, or vice versa, you need to be mature enough to listen. Without responding, just listen so that you can fine-tune your own behavior. Not to say that everything he wants I need to adapt to, and everything she wants I need to adapt to, but perhaps I did something that was wrong. Perhaps I need to listen and see how I've hurt her feelings, or how I've hurt his feelings. And then after I listen and seek to understand before I put my word in, right? Seek to understand before you seek to be understood. Listen while remaining silent. Before I do that, I'm going to listen attentively and then assess. Here comes the hard part. If I feel that she is right, I'll repeat. If I feel that she is right, and I have to be honest, or if I feel that he is right, and I have to be honest, it's not lekker to say that he is right or she's right, but you have to be honest. Then in that case, reflect and sincerely apologize. Learn to say, I'm sorry, and mean it. It will make the world of difference in your relationship. The problem is, sometimes we even know that he's right or she's right, but there's something inside of us called the nafs that says, it can't be. There has to be some other way to explain this. I want you to remember something. مَا زَادَ اللَّهُ عَبْدًا بِعَفْوٍ إِلَّا عِزَّةً. Never has Allah increased anyone who possesses the quality of pardoning except in honor and virtue. By learning to humble yourself when you are wrong, when you made a mistake, or when you offended the other, and say, I'm sorry for hurting your feelings. I'm sorry for what I said. I lost my cool. I'll try better next time. You may think that you'll be a lesser person as a result, because that's what your nafs says. That's what shaitan says. That's what the ego says. But wallahi, if you do it sincerely, for the sake of Allah, Allah will raise you in honor, and your spouse first will get a bit of a heart attack, and then realize, subhanallah, my partner, my wife, my husband, they are really growing. I better grow along with them. And this, in a nutshell, is one way to make tafsir of expressing love, learning to express love in the way that is appropriate for your relationship, and learning to adjust when you don't quite meet the desired target. But now, what about the mercy? Because it's not always going to be about love. When I got married, one of my teachers, Maulana Mu'adh Ali, may Allah grant him a long life, he gave a talk, he said, marriage, before you get married, some people make it seem like it's all about roses. Walks on the beach, hand in hand, candlelit dinners. It's just magical. And other people will make it seem like it's all about the thorns. Are you crazy? You're putting the noose around your neck. You're really going to tie the knot. You're really going to give up your freedom. But the reality is it's neither. It's a combination. Because the rose consists of the rose, the flower itself. It also has thorns and leaves. And marriage is the full product. So the sooner we realize that, the sooner we can adopt these qualities that Allah places in our marriage and that we should nurture in our marriage. Qualities of love and mercy. So why the mercy? Why love and mercy? Why not just mawadda wal mahabba? It's all about love. Love, love, love. All you need is love. Because it doesn't work like that, right? Trust me. 15 years of marriage, I'm qualified to say it doesn't work like that. And I'm sure all of you would agree. It's not always going to be that in every situation, you just love the living daylights out of the person. So what do you do in those moments? Is it heaven or hell? No. Rahmah is an important quality for the success of a marriage. Firstly, among the things that you dislike in your spouse, from very early on, you need to learn to not sweat the small stuff. So what if she doesn't push the toothpaste up from the bottom of the tube? It was an irritation at first because you weren't used to that. But it's toothpaste. Get over it. You with me? Don't sweat the small stuff. If you're going to nitpick about every negative quality that you dislike in your spouse, what's that going to do to the marriage? How are you going to focus on the positive qualities, the things that really cause you to love? So learn to overlook, just like Allah overlooks your faults. But this doesn't mean overlook the big flaws. Because remember, you had a list of do's and don'ts, you had a list of no compromises. So when things that are not to be compromised are compromised, now criticism is in order. But when we criticize, when we address the issue with our spouse, husband to wife, wife to husband, it's very important that we adopt the sunnah in relation to that. So do so sparingly, with wisdom, beautifully, and most importantly, privately. Not in front of the children, not in front of the parents, not in front of friends, certainly not on social media, right? And anonymously posting, some husbands are just terrible at X, Y, Z. No. Criticism and the way we put the issue in conversation is very important. Because your spouse can either accept that this is being discussed now, or from the very outset, because of your approach, they've already shut themselves off. They're not interested in discussing the point, because your very facial expression is telling them, oh, now it's on. We're in battle mode now. We're in battle mode now. And then the stuff from last month, last year, and when you first got married, all comes up again. So instead of going into battle mode, use wisdom. Deal with your anger first, then with your spouse. If there's an issue, the issue makes you angry. Because it wouldn't be an issue otherwise. So now instead of going to your spouse with the issue and your anger, try to calm down first. Deal with your anger, calm down, and then focus on the issue. In academics, when people argue the person as opposed to the argument, what do we call this? What do we call this? Anybody know? Yes? Ad hominem. Don't play the player, play the ball. The issue is at hand. Be mature enough to discuss the issue, not the person. Don't attack. So deal with your anger first. The Prophet ﷺ, when asked for advice, he said, La taghdab. 2 words. Don't get angry. The person said, no, give me advice. He said, don't get angry. And clearly the person was starting to lose patience because they continued. Give me some advice. He said, don't get angry. Deal with your anger first. Because when you are angry, you've adopted a quality of shaitan. And when you adopt a quality of shaitan, you can't be rational in your thoughts. This one is critically important. Ihsan. When dealing with your wife, when dealing with your husband, even if no one is watching, her parents are not there, the children are not around, right? Her older brothers are not there. Nobody's there to take her side. It's just you and her. Or when you are dealing with your husband, it's just you and him. You are never alone. Just like our opening slide. Understand that between the two of you, there is always Allah. And the way you speak to her matters. Because the day you got married, and the way she speaks to you matters. What did the wali or the imam say when he gave you that contract of nikah? أزوجك على ما أمر الله به بإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان. Ma'ruf and ihsan, these are the qualities. What is ihsan? أن تعبد الله, we all know it. It is to worship Allah as though we see Him. And if you cannot, then with conviction that He sees you. So when I'm speaking to my husband, when I'm speaking to my wife, I need to understand that my words must be good enough to filter through Allah first. My tone, my actions. You never need to raise your voice. Even though we do, we are weak, right? Allah says in Surah Al-Luqman that the worst of sounds is the screaming of an ass. The worst of sounds. So don't sound like that. The worst of sounds to Allah. Don't raise the volume of your voice. Address the argument in a more clear way. Unfortunately, we become weak and we tend to resort to these things. May Allah forgive us. But what's important is that we are mature enough to accept our weaknesses and then grow, inshallah. The reason why it's so important to learn to deal with your spouse in a good way is because it's a reflection of your character. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah said, a person's tongue gives you a taste of the flavor of their heart. The way you deal with your spouse is the character that you possess according to Allah. The character that you have with your friends is not the one for which Allah judges you. The character you have with your neighbor, or your employer, or your employees, or your secretary, or the people at the masjid, or your fellow fishermen, or your fellow sports people. None of those characters or versions of it is the character that Allah will judge you by. Instead, the Prophet ﷺ said, أَكْمَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِيمَانًا أَحْسَنُهُمْ خُلُقًا وَخِيَارُكُمْ لِنِسَائِهِمْ. The believers with the best iman are those who have the best character. And the best of you are those who are best to their spouse. So it is that character. It's who you are with your husband. It is who you are with your wife that determines who you are with Allah. May Allah beautify our characters. And then, when it comes to mercy, when it comes to the things in your spouse that you don't quite enjoy, the first reaction that we would have is, I need to change this in them. But what we need to remember is the paradigm of change, the shifting that happens according to Quran and Sunnah, is that when you desire change, you need to make the first move. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah doesn't change the condition of people until they change their own condition. So we start saying things to ourselves. If only she could just change that thing about her, man, then everything would be fine. If you can just change these ways about you, then everything would be fine. This may be true, but that is not how you bring about change. You start with yourself. You look at your own actions, your own characteristics, because she's created from you. She's a reflection of you. Her treatment of you is a reflection of your treatment of her. So when you start speaking her love language, and you start, oh, she really enjoys foot rubs in the bed. And even though I don't like it at all, if I do more of that, then I get more of the stuff that I really enjoy. But hold on, what if I do that and then I don't get anything in return? That's the nafs. Curb the nafs and tell yourself, I'm going to lead by example. Be charitable. Maulana Muhammed mentioned this in terms of intimacy, sexual intercourse. If you change the way you see your relationship and your function in it, be of service and everything changes. And the worst mistake you can make is to say, well, okay, I'm going to change. So today you start doing things differently. Tomorrow you expect the change to be apparent in your spouse. But yesterday I spoke nice to you all day long. Didn't you notice it? Today you're supposed to be a better person. And then you stop because the change wasn't quite working. Now, when you change, you need to make those changes sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm going to change because if I am a good spouse, this will please my Rabb. I will gain of His blessings. He will place in our relationship love and mercy, and my spouse has no choice but to follow suit, because Allah will bring about the change, right? Again, this is just one approach to understanding mawaddata wa rahma, love and mercy. You have to figure it out within your own relationship. But make the effort, make the time, and do the work. The only result that can come about of it is change. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Are there any questions quickly before we break? For either of us, inshallah ta'ala. Bismillah. Sorry, I can't hear. What was the quote that we mentioned about? About the tongue? No, that wasn't Imam Ghazali, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah. He mentioned that a person's tongue gives you a taste of what is in their heart. I'm going to give this one to Maulana Muhammed. And then I'll take the next one, inshallah. Surely there are questions. You're just waiting for the right person to ask them. Maulana, you want to proceed with that one, inshallah? Okay. Bismillah. Not now. Just so you know, we're taking a few questions and then we're going for the break for Salat al-Asr, and then we'll proceed again thereafter.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The question reads as follows. My fiance and I work at the same place with non-Muslims who have a tendency to gossip. Does Shaykh think it's a good idea for both of us to continue working at the same place after marriage, as I strongly feel it will bring arguments? I think it's a fairly simple and straightforward case, but there's a lot of dynamics that you need to consider. The one would be that if you leave the workplace, then naturally you'll be without a job, and that's an income stream. Right? So very importantly, when one looks to move from one job to another job, then you obviously need to, if you're cutting your supply line, you need to make sure that you have an alternative supply line. This is very important to understand that from an Islamic perspective, when you make a decision, decisions are looked at not atomistically but holistically. And this is something that Mullah Irshaad also alluded to earlier on in terms of the laws of causality. So based on the gossip and based on the environment and your impending marriage, absolutely it's not the best idea to remain there. So I say stop working, then you lose your job, and then you're in financial difficulty, and then you attribute your financial difficulty to Islam. Whereas, we looked at it at an atomistic way. You need to look at it in a holistic way. So that's not what I'm being asked, but I'm just mentioning it. And it's a common sense rule that if you have a stream of income, you don't cut your supply line until you secure an alternate supply line. That's the way the world works. It's very important. So many times you may find yourself, I know this is related to Islamic finance or Islamic contract law in a certain way, but many times you know that the job you're in is not the best job. Don't leave immediately. Make provisions that in a protected way that you're able to actually extricate yourself from that circumstances and place yourself in better circumstances. So having explained that, almost like a type of a disclaimer, looking at the question itself, it's a very bad environment for you to be finding yourself in because of all the vices, some scholars consider the greatest vice to be backbiting. Backbiting, it's an insidious, evil phenomenon, something which we underscore a lot. We underestimate the detrimental impact that backbiting has upon relationships. And Allah SWT knows best. If ever you wanted to get a measure of how bad backbiting is, look at the simile that Allah SWT draws in terms of the Quran, the metaphor He uses. Allah SWT says, would you like to partake of the dead carrion, that of your brother? So backbiting about somebody is like chewing their carrion flesh and meat. It's horrendous. So if that is a measure and so forth. And then sometimes we overestimate our capacity to withstand negative things. Like they can backbite all they want, it doesn't affect me. We sometimes overestimate our capacity to actually withhold that and withstand that. If I can, maybe just my very anecdotal experience, and I'm sure you have a greater spiritual condition. But my condition is such that many times I find myself, somebody speaks to me negatively about my friend, right? I bend over backwards to defend the honor of my friend, only to find when I meet him again that I've changed towards him. Like a moment ago, I was defending him tooth and nail. People were speaking bad about him. So just being on the receiving end of backbiting. That's why our scholars say, why present yourself, and they use not the best of examples, but the crass examples. Why are you the dirt bin that the stuff gets thrown into? So in terms of your relationship, your fiancé and so forth, that toxic environment is absolutely not good. So again, the only point I say, you should look for an alternative situation, unless you're in a position where you can actually right the wrong. Like you can actually consciously not be part of that and so forth, but also for you to be responsible in terms of giving up your livelihood. And Allah SWT knows best. I hope that answers the question sort of in a multifaceted way.
Jazakallah khair, Saidi. We'll take a break now, inshallah, for Asr. Please come back so that we can start at 4:45, and we will have some finger foods by the time you get back, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
الصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطاهرين ما دام ما في السماوات والأرضين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. We're going into our second session, and the topic given to me was potential conflict in terms of money. So we're in a social arrangement, we are husband and wife, and one potential area of conflict would be money management, etc. So we're basically going to be looking at that bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala with, again, just a basic introduction or broad introduction in terms of money in relation to a couple, husband and wife. How does it apply? So the first verse would be a very clear verse, and in terms of Islamic contract law and Islamic finance, this is one of those axiomatic verses, axle verses. Most laws in terms of Islamic contract law revolve around this particular verse, and it simply reads, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ. Don't devour your wealth amongst one another بِالْبَاطِلِ, in an invalid manner, in an unjust manner, in a wrong manner, إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً عَنْ تَرَاضٍ مِنْكُمْ, except when there is mutual consent. So it may very well be that we are in a marriage, and because we're not managing our wealth correctly or properly, it may ultimately amount to either the husband or the wife devouring the wealth of another, which is a very interesting sort of issue. The next one, the narration is a long narration. I don't want to focus on the narration. On one occasion, I went to a nikah, to a marriage ceremony. So the Shaykh, he started mentioning this particular narration, and I thought to myself, what is he talking about, this narration at a marriage? I couldn't, in the initial, in the first instance, draw the link between this narration and the marriage contract. So he said, the narration of Al-Muflis, it's a famous narration, who's a bankrupt person. So the Prophet ﷺ says that a bankrupt person is he who comes on the day of judgment, or she who comes on the day of judgment. They basically come with prayer, fasting, having dispensed of their alms tax and so forth. But so in other words, all of the religious, all of the ritual acts of worship were in order. So this person comes laden with good deeds, ritualistic good deeds. But the challenge would be, قَدْ شَتَمَ هَذَا, he had sworn without just cause another person, or أَكَلَ مَا هَذَا, he had devoured the wealth of another without just cause, وَسَفَكَ دَمَ هَذَا, he had let the blood of another without just cause. So I still couldn't see the connection, and then the author said that let it not be that on the day of judgment that you end up being a bankrupt person, and the first creditor standing in line to get credits from you would be your partner. And that's where the connection is. So again, very importantly, how we manage our wealth within our relationships and external to our relationship is very important. The same rules that apply when we're dealing with somebody else, a third person, other than ourselves as spouses, exactly the same rules apply when I'm dealing with my spouse. If I'm borrowing money from her, I'm lending money to her, and so forth. Monna Ashraf Ali Tanwi has this very beautiful one-liner and says that live with one another as brothers and sisters in terms of your social dynamic. But they say, ta'amalu kal ajanib. But when you do business, then you should do business as if it is a stranger. If it was a stranger, you'd have a contract in place, you'd have understanding in place. And when we don't have these understandings in place, and I had the good fortune, and I see some of the students are here as well, of teaching Islamic contract law for a number of years. And many of the issues would be very uncomfortable. How do I lend my brother money? And because he's my brother, contract, I'm the lender, you the borrower. Rather the uncomfortability of that than the uncomfortability when he doesn't honor the agreement. So that's the play-off that you need to have, and Allah SWT knows best. So very importantly, so what we're going to look at, you asking again the Islamic context. When you go to a masjid, what happens at the nikah?
I thought this would be maybe a simple and easy approach to looking at the marriage contract. When you go to the masjid, what happens there? If you think about it, you have the bride, groom, that's the guy. Okay, so you have the bridegroom, and nowadays you have the bride also in attendance. So you need the bride, you need the bridegroom. What else do you have? You have the guardian. A lady cannot marry herself. Her guardian needs to hand her over in marriage. And you have 2 witnesses. And that basically concludes the marriage contract. Do you need anything over and above that? From an Islamic perspective, absolutely no. Because marriage is a social contract. It's a social dealing. And this is very important to appreciate, because in Islam, we don't conflate between the two. We don't throw everything into the cesspot, and excuse my wording, because in retrospect, it will become a cesspot. We don't throw everything into the cesspot of marriage. All our contracts into the marriage, our social contracts into the marriage. No, we keep things neat and clean and simple. It's a social contract and not it's not a commercial contract as such. So just to give us a good idea in terms of conceptualization, what happens at the nikah, it's really a social contract. It's not a commercial contract, and conflation is problematic. So we find many times that when we come, so I'm discussing this from a point of view whereby money within the marriage can become a potential point of diversion and conflict. Whereas if we structure things correctly, and I honestly believe, if you look at any type of regime, you cannot forget the fact that you are a Muslim and an adherent to the law of Allah. But just for argument purposes, just think to yourself that I'm looking at different options. When I normally speak to people, I don't sometimes quote the Sharia option as a Sharia option. I just quote it as an option. And any person well endowed with a good intellect, he will, on every basis, he will go for the Sharia option because it makes the most sense. In a worldly way and in another worldly way. Particularly inheritance. It's very important. I'm not talking about the management of the assets while you are living. I'm talking about inheritance. There are 2 distinct issues. So what happens is we come to the mosque, we get married, then we go and we opt for a marital regime. And when we opt for the marital regime, it's not Islam that creates the complications within our marriage. It's rather the marital regime that creates the complication, and Allah SWT knows best. So what are let's just very quickly look at it. I'll just mention what the marital regimes are. The anti-nuptial contract without accrual, that's basically the Islamic option which is considered to be permissible. Everything else in terms of community of properties and so forth, to my mind, it doesn't make sense in a worldly sense in terms of your asset management. Like whatever you own, your wife owns, whatever liabilities you have, the other person, by no doing of their own, basically assumes those liabilities. It's crazy. And Allah SWT knows. But look, I mean, my introduction was from an Islamic perspective, so I'm looking at it from that particular lens. But practically, I think it doesn't make sense, and Allah SWT knows best. So be careful when you opt for a marital regime. Speak to one of your scholars, and they'll be able to advise you, lest you get into something, and then, and you always hear positive stories about in community of properties, but we don't hear the other side of the story. And many times you must get married in community of properties. Why? Because the lady walks away as the winner. You haven't heard the cases where the lady walks away with the short end of the stick. And there's a lot of cases like that, and Allah SWT knows best. So as a point of conflict, we need to just be careful about that. Then you got married in the masjid, you didn't opt for any of these marital regimes, you're just keeping it plain and simple, and that's the best way to lead your life. Life is complex, but we lead it simply. You must be aware of the complexities, but you lead your life simply. That's just a general rule that came to mind, and Allah knows best. Okay, so the reality of our subsistence is that we have dual income households. Isn't that the truth? Like I work and my wife works. The question that we had now was my fiance, we met in the workplace. And so it's husband and wife both working, dual income households. So basically the husband and the wife works. How do we deal with that from an Islamic perspective? And here again, I think very importantly, the Islamic configuration of things need to be kept at the top of mind. Perhaps I can start off with a very quick story. I'm rushed for time, and that thing is now 10 minutes, it's 8 minutes already. And also over and above that, we're trying to finish by 5. Right? One of the lessons, is it 5? Yeah. Another one of life's lessons, though, doesn't relate to our, what's the name, is you must beat time. If you're beating time, then you're good to go. Every day is a fight against time. Because man is at a loss when it comes to time. When time goes by, you can't make it. If you don't cut the time is going to cut you. And you can probably write a book about how important it is to beat time at every level of your life. But just sometimes it's very difficult. Like now. But anyway, so it's very important to understand certain phenomena. Very important. And when we understand these phenomena, it gives us a proper appreciation. I'll start with a story. A person came to my brother, very reasonable. He says, look, this is how we manage our affairs. So what happens is, my salary, right, we put it on the table. My wife's salary, we put it on the table. And very equitably, we divide it and we cover all of our expenses. So in the husband's mind, that is an equitable way of going through things. That's absolutely inequitable from a Sharia perspective. From a Sharia perspective, if your wife is earning, her income belongs to her. Her income belongs to her. Your income belongs to you, but you have certain obligations in relation to it. And you must use your income to cover that obligation of maintenance. Maintenance referring to food on the table, clothes on your back and your dependents' back, and also a roof over your head. If it is that you have an arrangement, that's something else. Look, we really can't survive on a single income. So we're going to be doing this together. That's a different case altogether. That's by agreement. So it's like your wife is contributing based on her own view. This is very important for the longevity of a marriage. As much as I used to do this empirical, anecdotal studies with ladies in particular, you know, as much as ladies love to work, there's something which they love more. Family. Believe it or not. They love work and they want to go up the corporate ladder. And one of the things that a lady would love is for somebody to look after her. Simple as that. She doesn't want to work anymore. She just wants to be at home and she wants somebody to look after her. On average. Every general rule has an exception. So there may be exceptions to that. But that's generally sort of the psyche and the makeup of ladies. So if your wife currently, now this happens a lot of the time, your wife is currently working and you guys agreed, look, that this is a dual income household and you're going to be covering the bond. She doesn't want to work anymore. It's too toxic of an environment to work. What does the husband tell her? But who's going to cover the bond? It's not her responsibility to cover the bond in the first instance. Unless you bought the house and you duly own the house. That's a different issue altogether. Because contractually she owns 50%, so she must contribute to 50%. Are you with me? So we must be very clear on these things. Number one, to have the segregation from the outset. This is our marriage and these are our contractual engagements. Very important to have. And then when you, because it influences every decision going forward. And there can be a lot of misconceptions around this and Allah SWT knows best. So that was the one issue about nafaqah. So there's a dual income household. So the important thing about nafaqah, that's the husband's responsibility and her earnings are basically hers. But here's a nice balance also. So the wife says, you know, my earnings is my earnings. That's it. Well, you have a license to say that. But there's also a balance to it. What is the balance? That a lady is only allowed, what right, ultimate right, does the husband hand over the wife? Intimacy. No, that is very true. But there's something, if you want to be intimate with her, you need to have access to her. So it means the time. So a husband has a right to the wife's time. You follow? And intimacy is very important. This is also another one of those challenges. But again, we were talking in the break and Dr. Yusuf was saying perhaps we must have a part 2 because many of these things need to be like, you know, like unpacked. You know, when we talk about sort of like intimacy, so yes, that is a very important right. And the Prophet ﷺ very clearly established that as a right for the husband. And the examples given are unique examples. A lady may be preoccupied in the kitchen. She may be preoccupied in terms of traveling. But the husband rights trumps all of that rights and is for a better social good if you really think about it. But that needs to be unpacked at another stage. You just think about it. It's very, 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 very important to understand it. Because unfortunately in today's time, a lady can also use that as leverage. And it creates an imbalance within the relationship and it creates problems and stress within the relationships. So therefore, the Sharia from the outset curtails a lady in terms of using that particular phenomenon as leverage within a marriage. It's not permissible for her to do it as such. So not intimacy per se. You were too interested in the previous session. I can see that, alhamdulillah, but that's good. But so intimacy ties into time, and the husband has time. So if the lady is working, what does it mean? It means that she's working at the leave of the husband. So when she thinks about the salary, she also needs to consider that into the bigger scheme of things. That I am working at the leave of my husband, and that creates a sort of a balance, as opposed to my money is my money, and that's it. It's an important approach to keep in mind. And then also, if it is a dual income household, and then the parameters basically of, we're done, the parameters of a lady working, we know about that. It's a story of Musa alayhi salam. Is it permissible for a lady to work? It's permissible for her to work. Actually, from an Islamic perspective, in many instances, very encouraged, but there are certain parameters about that, and you can look to the story of Musa, the daughters of Shu'aib, according to some, and the way they manage themselves within a work environment in terms of segregation and so forth. So can a lady work? Yes. But you obviously, that can put a lot of pressure onto a marriage, the work environment. And I'm going to say this very simply, but there are many stories about this. The anecdotes are endless. When a lady has a problem in the marriage, now with social media, it gets out there. But before social media was there, she has a colleague that she can cry on, shoulder can cry on in the workplace. And that's the end of the marriage. And Allah SWT knows best. Alhamdulillah. 1 minute over time. Not too bad. There's actually another whole section also, but it's okay.
There are a few seats that have opened up. Some people left. So if you are standing around and you would like to sit down, there's 3 in the front row. And I see a few, in various other places. This is the last speaking session. Then we will have a short 5-minute presentation on not a part 2 to this, but another related matter. And then we're going to have Q&A. Inshallah, so if you have any questions, you may write them down or you may ask them at the relevant time, and then we proceed to have something to eat. This will be a short session, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. What we would like to do in this session is look at another verse of the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the husband and wife and how they should be for one another. Now, bear in mind that we've already said people are different. So we will see ourselves and our roles in our marriages differently, and that's fine. But we have certain commonalities. So looking at this verse in Surah Baqarah, verse number 187, Allah speaks about fasting, the month of Ramadan. He says, أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ. Permissible for you on the nights of fasting is sexual intercourse with your wives. Hunna libasul lakum, you are clothing for them. Wa antum libasul lahunna, and they are clothing for you. Now, there's a long story behind this. Firstly, it wasn't permissible before. During the fasting nights, just as much as you had to fast during the day, you had to fast at night as well. And then what happened was, because they were not, husbands and wives were not commanded to sleep separately from one another. So you a man, you fasted all day, there's your wife, she's halal for you, you're sleeping in the same bed. Inevitably, something's going to happen. So in the impermissible time, when we are not supposed to be engaged in sexual intimacy, in fact, people did. And this incident reached Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that ruling was abrogated. So Allah says, now uhilla lakum, it is permissible for you. But more interesting than the permissibility of intercourse in the nights of fasting is the description that Allah uses for husbands and wives. Hunna libasul lakum wa antum libasul lahunna. So if you want to understand your role in the marriage, look at garments. And I've identified 3 characteristics of clothing. Arguably more, but let's look at 3. The first one is protection. Understand that you are a protection for her and she is a protection for you in different capacities. Often the husband is looked at as the physical protector and guardian of the family. When there's trouble, the wife expects that the husband is to stand up, show courage, be brave, and stand up for the family. But she's also protecting him by way of protecting his chastity. You see, especially in the world we're living in today, and in the society that we find ourselves, and often minority Muslim situations, we are surrounded by temptation. We are surrounded by temptation everywhere we look. Every device, every gadget, every workplace, every movie, every series is surrounded by temptation. And all of these things, if it draws our attention, it will take us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the husband and the wife, they have a duty with one another to protect each other's chastity. So over and above physical protection, there's that type of protection. When you wear clothes, it protects you. It protects you from outside elements. And it protects you by keeping the heat, the insulation on the inside. It protects you from outside elements like rain and snow and cold and heat. But it also covers your privacy, covers your private area, that which you don't want exposed to others. Then we look at adornment. Clothes are not just there because they are functional. They protect us physically from outside elements and cover our privacy. But we also wear clothes to adorn ourselves to a certain extent. So similarly, having the relationship with your spouse will allow you to adorn not only your spouse and making them look good by complimenting them, but will also allow you to adorn yourself, because it will give you a chance to improve your own character. So when you seek to be a better spouse, at the same time you are actually learning to be a better person. The third quality of clothing is that it is the most intimate thing to your body, the closest thing you have to your body. Your clothing knows your deepest, darkest secrets. Your clothing knows what no man and no woman other than your spouse knows. And therefore, having that intimate relationship in your marriage is very important. Being as close to one another as your clothing is very important. But that intimacy is private. And for this reason, husbands and wives need to learn that what happens between them is supposed to remain between them. This is a very important element in the success of a marriage. And this doesn't only mean keeping the secrets of the bedroom private, but their lives in general. We had a conference about social media, and this trend of having to put everything in your life. Here we are at this holiday, here we are at this resort, here we are having breakfast. It's not good for your relationship on several levels. If for nothing else, then you are attracting unnecessary ayn. وَالْعَيْنُ حَقٌّ. The Prophet ﷺ said that the eye is true. It really does have an effect. Why write all of that to your relationship? Right? So these qualities are just some of the lessons that we learn from garments. To conclude, I also wanted to talk a little bit about intimacy and just touch on a few points to complement what Maulana Muhammad had mentioned before. But these are straight to the point really, because this wasn't my topic. It just stems off from the intimacy of garments. The first one is about frequency. How often should a couple be engaged in sexual intimacy? So on the one hand, this differs based on your age, where you are, but as a general rule, it's interesting that Imam Ghazali notes that in his estimation, it should be at least once every 4 days. Where does he get this from and why? He says the Sharia allows one husband to have up to 4 wives. And he should give each wife their right in that situation accordingly. And therefore, at least once every 4 days. From the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, we don't have any prescription as to how often it should be. But we do know that he said, for the Friday, whosoever performs a ghusl, وَغْتَسَلَ, and causes somebody else to perform a ghusl, Friday mornings is important, and Thursday nights as well. We know that it should be regular. So people who are not engaged in physical intimacy for weeks on end, months on end, years on end, understand that there's a problem and you need to address that problem. Because it's not healthy for him or for her or for the couple or for the family. Sexual intimacy is an important part of marriage. And if it's lacking in a relationship, do something about it. I believe it should be as frequent as is required for both partners to remain chaste. And again, back to ma'ruf. If he says every day is what I need, then somehow, even if she's unable to accommodate him with her physical self, there are other ways in which she can accommodate him in order to make sure that he remains chaste. And they have to come to an agreement on that. But every couple is different. If both of them say, you know what, I don't need it that much, once every 4 months is okay, it's a problem. Because they are compromising for a reason that isn't healthy. And they should address that. If it's age and so forth, that's a different story. However, if we approach physical intimacy as an act of worship, you must make a lot of ibadah, isn't it? So even if you are not in the mood, understand that you need ibadah in your life. You need to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you need to give a lot of sadaqah. So sometimes when you are not in the mood, understand it is charity. So do stuff to get you in the mood. And then finally, and this is the one that I actually really wanted to get to more than anything else, proficiency. Proficiency. You studied to write your learners, then you took lessons to drive a car because you understood that it required certain skills. If you play a sport, it took years of practice to get to the point where you considered yourself to be proficient. Any skill in life. What makes us think that physical intimacy is any different? Yes, we are Muslim and we practice haya and modesty, and we don't just randomly have discussions about physical intimacy, especially when you are Allah conscious and you consider it, justifiably so, to be a topic that has a certain time and a certain space. But that doesn't mean it has no time and no space, right? I hope Maulana doesn't mind me saying so. But when I got married, Maulana Muhammed gave me a book and he said, study. And that's where I will leave it. And that's so important, is that we need to understand it's, yes, a natural human act. So okay, this part goes there, for example. But there's so much more to it than that. And our scholars have written works on this. Imam Suyuti has got some interesting works on sexual intercourse. Imam Ghazali, right, who's regarded as a paragon of spirituality, he's got very in-depth discussions about this as well. Learn, but don't learn from the wrong sources. Don't learn your skill and your proficiency from FHM and what's the other ones? GQ and I don't know the names of these magazines. But you still need to learn. And as I said earlier on, ma'ruf means that I need to learn what she likes. She needs to learn what I like. We need to learn what works for one another and what are the no-nos. Right? Over and above, does the Sharia allow this? That's the first thing people want to know. Does the Sharia allow this type of intercourse? Does the Sharia allow that type of intercourse? Hold on, that's one side of the equation. That's the laws, the good, the bad, the right, the wrong. That's in its place. But have you learned what your partner enjoys? And have you become really good at it? And this is very important, but it's not just about the theoretical knowledge. Remember, in order for a car to drive well, it needs to be reliable. It needs to, the engine needs to work properly. If there's body work that needs to take place, it needs to get fixed. Get it fixed. If it needs a regular service, get it serviced. But you need to take care of your health. The Prophet ﷺ was physically strong. There are ahadith that inform us that there were times when he would visit each one of his wives in one night. ﷺ. And I mean that in a physical, intimate way. Physically intimate way. Are you man enough for that? Are you woman enough for that? And often, this is because we don't look after our health. If you can't walk around your block once, if you can't make, then I'm pretty sure you're not going to be able to make it to a satisfactory point in physical intimacy. You need to have a certain level of care and concern for your health and well-being, yours and your spouse's. You need to be able to move yourself. You need to be able to have endurance and stamina and strength, because physical intimacy is a physical act of worship, right? So look after your health. Very importantly, every scholar who discusses physical intimacy discusses hygiene, right? Hygiene. When the Prophet ﷺ came home after being out and about, his sunnah is before he would go and speak to his family, he would brush his teeth. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. You need to look after your physical hygiene, right? If you want her to be into you, you need to make yourself attractive, which is why I've got the 3 H's: health, hygiene, and hot. I don't know how else to express it in an easy way to understand and to memorize. So the 3 H's. You need to remain or make yourself attractive to your spouse. And everyone can do this. It's not about the looks that, okay, I'm not an attractive person and finish. No, make an effort. Get your hair cut, get your fingernails trimmed, make sure your breath is smelling nice and fresh. If you know that you've picked up some, start losing it, right? Go on a diet. Work at it. This is an important part of success in your marital life. So it's worthwhile the investment, right? And no partner can expect the other partner to be perfect. But often we don't want perfection. All we want is effort. We want to see that, oh, you are actually interested in improving this for the sake of both of us. And when they see that effort, they want to make an effort as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us this, the understanding, and grant us the 3 H's and a lot of worship. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, it's very heartwarming to see that we have a good turnout today. So I just want to take the opportunity in introducing a visitor, a guest from overseas. I'm sure many of you have heard about the marriage conference that will be taking place next week, Sunday. And we just felt that the topic today, how to be a better spouse, ties in nicely with next week's marriage conference. So on my right, I have Brother Ustad Sajid Hussain. He has a very long bio, but I'm going to rather give him the time to discuss the marriage conference, because he is the developer and the creator, and he's come down a week before the event, inshallah, just to build more momentum for the event. So I'll hand over to you, Sajid.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. MashaAllah. So let me start off with a quick story. I have a family of 6 siblings. 4 of them are divorced. It got me thinking, what's going on here? The impact on my parents, the impact on my brothers and sisters, the impact on my nephew and nieces made me actually question that why are there so many divorces taking place in our homes, in our families, in our societies? So in 2014, I developed the concept of the marriage conference. In fact, it's a product called Happy Marriage, because I'm sure every single person here doesn't want to have an unhappy marriage. So happy marriage it is. Currently, around the world, from Australia all the way to Canada, I'm involved in projects regarding marriage. The amount of divorces I am seeing and witnessing is actually scary and shocking. In the UK, for example, an average divorce takes place after 18 months. So you can just imagine the cost that a family would go through to start and get married with the blessings, and then those blessings go away. Why? Because the actual institute of marriage has been eroded. Now, mashallah, I was standing over there listening to the talks you guys, the Shaykh was sharing with you, and there's priceless gems. But the question you have to ask yourself is, nikah is the most important contract of your life, but what have you invested in it? Now, if you want to be a pilot or a doctor or a lawyer, you're going to have 6 years, 8 years, so forth of training. You want to get married? Bismillah, Kabul, good luck. That's the reality. Where's the training? There is no training. Why? Because our parents don't talk about this type of stuff. I have fathers who would talk to their daughter about what color flowers and what the menu is going to be, but he will never ever ask her the question, what would you do if your husband leaves you? What would you do if your husband relocates? These kind of questions, and the more severe questions than this, just aren't asked. So I was with Sheikh Yahya Ibrahim and Sheikh Allah in London in 2011, and they did an amazing workshop on marriage. So as we walk into lunch, I said, Mashaykhs, mashallah, great workshop, but what's next? And they said, well, what do you mean what's next? I go, well, what's next? How do we fix the solution? How do we find a solution? How do we fix the problem? Because that's your job. So Bismillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me the opportunity to start this. Now the marriage conference currently operates in 12 countries around the world. I like to summarize it as follows. You either want to get into one, or you want to maintain one, or you're desperate to get out of one. I'm not looking at you because you are. So the reality is most of us fall into one of these categories. We created this concept where the marriage conference will take you on a journey from the moment you wake up and say, I need to get married, to all the way what marriage will be like in Jannah. In between, we cover a whole range of things. So let me just gauge, how many of you are single here? Hands up if you're single. Don't be shy. Oh, astaghfirullah. Put your hands down. Oh, subhanallah. Shaykh. MashaAllah, man. This is not right, guys. So what we have is the morning session of the marriage conference is all about those who want to ask questions about marriage. For example, is there dating in Islam? What about the difference between love and infatuation? What kind of questions are you supposed to ask your spouse? Talking about the question to ask your spouse, I'm a life coach as well. And the first, when people say, what kind of question should I ask my spouse? I said, ask them the question, what is your parents' relationship like? And they're like, but why would I ask that? Just ask them that question. Because their parents' relationship will give you so much depth to understand the kind of person you're about to get married to. If there's no love in the house, you're going to have a struggle in your own relationships. But if love is there in the house where the parents are showing affection, then inshallah your marriage will also be prosperous. There's a lot of issues. Anyway, we continue. The journey continues of the marriage conference, and now you're talking about the cost of marriages. In the UK, it's now £45,000 to get married. Here, I presume it's not cheap as well. We've actually forgotten the hadith that the best of the marriages are the simplest. We spend a lot of money in extravagance, and the next morning they wake up with debt. There the problems start. Now, at lunchtime, we have parallel sessions where people who are looking for spouses, and all those who put their hands up, I noted you, inshallah. We have something called Soul Seekers, which is a halal matchmaking event. From the moment you arrive to the moment you leave, you're totally anonymous. Nobody knows your name, your telephone number, your Instagram, your Facebook, or anything. We did not want to start a process where on the day of judgment, we stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we say we open up the door for fitna. So we have scholars who actually conduct the event. MashaAllah, we have a great success rate. We are in 12 countries around the world with Soul Seekers, and it's an amazing event for brothers, sisters. It's for those who are single and those who are divorcees. We also have around the world for those who are widows, those who are looking for polygamous marriages, as well as for those who are disabled. Because if I was to ask you guys a question, when's the last time you went to a disabled wedding? I doubt any of you have. But are we saying we don't have disabled people in our communities? But this shows, right? This shows us as a community. We move on. The afternoon is for those who are newly married. Now, mashallah, you want to have a better marriage. So knowledge doesn't stop. What happens in the afternoon? You talk about issues like living with your mother-in-law, finance, parenting, careers, intimacy, and the journey continues. At the same time in the afternoon, we now talk about dark topics. The addictions are impacting our families, the drugs, the alcohol, the pornography. And then we finish off in the evening with the marriage conference, the marriage conference with the mashaykhs who talk about Jannah itself, what to expect, who you're going to be with. While this event is taking place, we have parallel sessions. So Soul Seekers is one of them. We have another area dedicated to sisters called Muslimah Lifestyle. This is everything that sisters need to know about, from the hijab to social media to careers to intimacy and so much more. This is a sisters-only zone, run by sisters, conducted by sisters, with only sister speakers. We also have workshops that take place from international and local scholars who, inshallah, will be sharing their knowledge and so forth. We have a speaker's corner where you can go and ask whatever question you want on these topics. We have counseling session areas for those who are having problems and they want to have a better life and so forth. They can go and address. We have a whole expo bazaar area for those who want to go shopping for their marriage. See, marriage is actually beautiful, but it's hard work. I mean, seriously, it's hard work. You know, just when you're about to go to Hajj or Umrah and they said, give me one piece of advice, and they say, patience. My advice is compromise. I just want to share a story quickly before I finish. When I first got married, mashallah, my wife's in the audience, and I'm sure I'll get the look, so I'm going to avoid looking at her. The very first thing I did, she said to me, can you go and get a toilet roll holder? No problem, I could do that. She goes, get a stainless steel one. No, no worries. What do? I buy a matte one. I bring it home, I install it, I'm really proud of myself, I've done a bit of DIY, I put the toilet paper on it. She came round to look at it. She goes, this isn't stainless steel. I go, it's a toilet paper roll holder. The toilet paper's on it, you can't see it, what's the big issue? She goes, no. I said, stainless steel. I went, okay. I took off the toilet paper, I undid the holder, I drove across London to Tottenham Court Road to return it, to get a stainless steel one, bring it home and install it. The smile on her face was, okay, mashallah. I realized compromise. Brothers, you have to compromise. Now, I have a gift here, and the gift is for those who give me the right answer. I'm going to ask you a question. Sisters, what is the number one thing a husband wants from his wife? Fire away. Yes, sister. Respect. Any other sisters? No? MashaAllah. Very good. Yes, you were going to say? Affection. Okay. Very good answer, sister. Yes. Peace of mind. Oh, I don't know about that. Oh, I'm also in the death business. Marriage and death. Yeah. Okay, brothers, what's the number one thing a wife wants from a husband? You can't answer on his behalf. Quality time, okay. What else? Love. Any other ones? Yes, brother. Trust. Okay. Actually, oh, here, the brothers are going crazy here. Yes, go. Attention. Shopping. MashaAllah, shopping. Okay, so you're right. All right, sister, the number one thing, I mean, I'm generalizing here around the world what we have with the feedback. The number one thing a sister wants, a wife wants from her husband is attention. Reality is that. Uncle Idris Khamisa, which you probably all know, he has a saying, he goes, in a day, a man speaks 12,500 words, and a woman speaks 25,000 words. So brothers, when you come back from home and she wants to talk, listen. Take out your noise-canceling headphones and watch the football without, pretending that you're ignoring her. And for the brothers, yes, the number one thing sisters, what number one thing the brother wants is respect. Why? Because you could be a street cleaner. And if you don't get the respect in your household, you're going to have problems in your marriage. So now, mashallah, thanks to Seekers Guidance, thanks to Islamia College, we have a great offer for you guys. When I was told by Dr. Yusuf that you guys are holding this event, I thought, mashallah, you guys are at least investing in your marriages. Wallahi, it's a Saturday afternoon. There's millions of people that live in South Africa, especially Muslims. What would they be doing right now? Maybe watching the World Cup, maybe washing their cars. Well, you have no water, right? So you can't wash your cars. Sorry, guys. No water, no electricity. Oh. I live in Istanbul right now for a reason. But no, alhamdulillah, may Allah give you barakah and protect you all, inshallah. So what we are having is we have the marriage conference taking place next week. We have amazing speakers. Wallahi, amazing speakers. I'm not trying to push and sell anything to you. When we did the marriage conference in Johannesburg in 2016, we had 3,400 people that attended. A year later, we had 5,360 people that came. We expect a big crowd next week. And when Dr. Yusuf told me that you guys are having a gathering, and I said, Bismillah, you are the people we like to invest in. So I'm here with Sister Nadia, and Sister Nadia and ourselves, what we would like to do is offer you the opportunity to buy one, get one free Black Friday deal. Come on down. And sister who said respect, this book is for you. This is a gift called The Gift. And I'm going to be shameless and pitch this. This book actually is... I do a lot of mentoring around the world. And the first question I ask a lot of people that I work with is, what's your gift in life? Now think about this question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not put you onto this planet just to eat and work. So what's your gift? We live life with emptiness, without purpose, without passion. Take time out tonight, tomorrow, next week, and ask yourself this question. Now some of you will recognize your gift immediately, and some of you won't. It will take time. But work on this, because the moment you realize your gift, subhanAllah, you will be able to live life with purpose and passion. I do what I do because I impact lives. Around the world, mashallah, I have the opportunity to go to great communities and make a difference. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from 7.5 billion people, has given me the opportunity to do this, and as well as my teams around the world. So I will sincerely ask you to also get involved in your communities and give back. Do not hoard the knowledge you have. Share what you learned today with everyone around you. If your marriage is blissful, alhamdulillah. But I guarantee you, you know somebody who's having problems. Give them the gift of knowledge. Tell them to come to the marriage conference. Let us help them. And just on a closing note, I remember in Johannesburg, we met this couple, and he's a sponsor. So when I asked him, brother, we want you to sponsor the marriage conference, he goes, I know everything about your event. I was there. I go, mashallah, okay. You let me talk for the last half an hour, and you could have told me to shut up. And he goes, no, I want to tell you something. He goes, I came to the marriage event, to the marriage conference, on the brink of divorce. I had no relationship with my children, and I was actually about to be divorced by my wife. He goes, I sat there, I cried all day, and since that day, I've never, ever had a better marriage. SubhanAllah, we don't know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do and whose hearts He will open and whose situation He will fix. All we are a tool, a medium, a mechanism to make a difference in our societies. So please do take this opportunity, spread the word. Like I said, Sister Nadia's over there. Sister Nadia, if you could just put your hand up so they know who you are. She is actually got some tickets, buy one, get one free. And wallahi, if money is an issue, not a problem. We will never ever turn anyone away, especially if they're seeking knowledge for the sake of Allah. So if you've got an issue, by all means, please still approach us, take a ticket, and inshallah keep us in your du'as. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Oh, I forgot to tell you when it is. It's next Sunday at CTICC. Yeah? And so don't forget. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Seekers Guidance will also be at the event. We have a booth over there. Our speakers are done, so it's time for Q&A. I'm going to read one. But before I do so, can I get a show of hands who has questions so I can just get an idea? No? Okay, maybe. Okay. So I'll read this question and then I'll ask Shaykh Irshaad actually to answer, and then we'll inshallah wrap up. The question is from a female. She says, if the husband and wife have been married for years and he did not pay the mahar in full and nafaqah from the beginning, is it still the wife's duty to be intimate with him? Shaykh Irshaad.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Generally, these are matters in which if he or she is not fulfilling the basic responsibilities, the basic fard duties that Allah has placed upon them, then that is a cause for the marriage to be nullified. They can nullify that marriage because they are not fulfilling their side of the contract. The only way in which that could still possibly work is if that particular woman in question is a very forgiving, very forbearing, overlooking woman who decides, you know what, I'm just happy for the company and I'm going to let go of all of this stuff. If then it's a decision that she makes. But her responsibilities have been lifted because both sides of the contract has not been fulfilled, and Allah knows best. But just like Maulana Muhammad said earlier on, this is critically important. Any couple that starts asking about their rights and their duties, like what are my rights and what are my husband's duties, a couple is in trouble. Because we don't live our married lives in Kitabul Nikah and Kitabul Talaq. Those are the laws that come into play, that have to be observed, that when there's a disputation, we check them. But when it comes to how we live with one another, look towards Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you will find the best of examples in him. طيب, leave it at that, inshallah.
Okay, final call for questions. Okay, there's no questions. Okay, thank you for attending. It's really a delight to see so many faces. Even though some people have left, there's still a huge crowd, alhamdulillah. Like I said in the beginning, this is our our fourth event in Cape Town this year. The next one, inshallah, will be in January. So keep your eyes, peeled for that. I do promise you, though, it'll be in a different venue, right? This is obviously too small. And shukran for your patience, especially the people on top, the people around the corner that cannot actually see the front. We do appreciate it. The marriage conference that our brother from the UK talked about is next week at CTICC. One of the scholars that spoke said that, look, maybe this event that we had today is just an introduction because there's so much to cover. So maybe we should have another one. I actually think that we should have a marriage retreat, right? So like I said, about 10 years ago or 7 years ago, whatever, Seekers Guidance had a spiritual retreat in Tulbagh, right? And people actually from all over the world came, from Australia, from the US, from the UK, and it was, I think, 3 or 4 days. Dr. Yusuf and myself were there, and some other local people coordinating. But maybe, since the crowd is so big here, and since this is such a important topic, maybe we should do a little retreat just to focus on this, because there's a lot to cover. So we will, inshallah, send you a survey after this event. I'll make sure that question is included, whether you'd be interested in a retreat. So inshallah, we'll let you know. Again, for those, if you might have come late, Seekers Guidance is a global Islamic seminary. We have these on-ground events in different parts of the world, in Cape Town, in the UK, in Turkey. We have a center in Canada as well. There are brochures that have been given to you. If you don't have one, you'll get one, inshallah, outside. Please support us with a monthly donation. That's how we are able to do these events and to have hundreds of courses free online. Nothing is payable to learn at Seekers Guidance, right? I mentioned earlier, knowledge without barriers. So these events, the retreat, if we have one, okay, let me not say that'll be free, I don't know, but everything else is free. So our courses, everything online is free. Jazakallah khair for coming. Jazakallah khair to Al-Ikhlaas Academia Library for hosting us. And there are some things to eat outside, so please grab them as you go out. And we will close with a dua from Shaykh Muhammed. But from me, Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطاهرين اللهم لك الحمد كله ولك الشكر كله وإليه يرجع الأمر كله لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا يا رب جمعا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما لا تجعل فينا ولا منا ولا بيننا شقيا ولا محروما برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم ألف بين قلوبنا وأصلح ذات بيننا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اجعل بين قلوبنا وبين قلوب الأزواج محبة ومودة ورحمة، ولا تجعل في قلوبنا ولا في قلوبهم نفرة وفتنة وفرارا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم آت نفوسنا تقواها وزكيها أنت خير من زكاها، أنت وليها ومولاها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اجعلنا من الهادين المهتدين ولا تجعلنا من الضالين المضلين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصل اللهم وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحان ربنا رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.